Ever pour your heart and soul into something, like really give it your all, only to see it kind of, well, flop?
Oh, yeah.
It's a crushing feeling, you know? And it's something a lot of entrepreneurs face, especially at the beginning. You wouldn't believe how many stories I've heard. Starts on a bang, everyone's excited, and then crickets.
You can imagine, yeah.
It made me think about all this when we decided to do this deep dive into The Lean Startup by Eric Ries.
Oh, good one.
It's a classic, and I know a lot of our listeners are already familiar with it.
All right.
But we're going deeper here, you know? We're trying to unearth those little golden nuggets that maybe you missed the first time, or practical ways to apply these principles, even if you're not in a traditional startup.
Yeah. And what's interesting about Reese's work, at least for me, is how it's not just for tech or, those Silicon Valley types. It's really about navigating uncertainty. And that's something that resonates across industries.
Yeah.
He's got that credibility too, right? I mean, he's been in the trenches from scrappy startups all the way to those big companies like, what was it, Intuit?
Yeah, exactly. And he makes this point that creating something new within a massive company, with all its established processes and, let's be honest, bureaucracy, it's not all that different from those, stereotypical garage startups.
Right.
You're still dealing with unknowns, tight budgets, and trying to convince people to take a chance on something new. It's just the scale that's different, right?
It's funny. Traditional business plans in those environments, they can feel like, I don't know, trying to steer a speedboat in a hurricane.
Ha ha, perfect analogy.
You need something way more agile.
Absolutely. And that's where the Lean Startup comes in. It's about embracing that uncertainty, viewing it less as a threat and more as an opportunity to learn and adapt.
Yeah, and that's where that whole idea of experimentation comes in.
Exactly. It's almost like that saying, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. Except here, the plan is this constant process of testing and iterating.
Makes sense.
So Reese lays out these 5 core principles, right? So I have to say they really resonated with me. Did any of those jump out at you in particular?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The first one, entrepreneurs are everywhere.
Yeah.
I think that one really challenges the stereotype, right?
Yeah.
It's not just the lone genius in the garage coding all night.
Yeah.
It could be anyone, anywhere. You
Yeah.
can be working on a side project, heading up a new team at your company. It's about spotting those opportunities and, more importantly, having the tools and the mindset to test them out.
It's funny you saying that because that ties into the second principle perfectly, entrepreneurship IS management.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I don't know why, but that one really clicked for me. It highlights how building a business, whether it's a one-person show or a massive company, it's about more than just the idea, no matter how brilliant it might be.
Right, right.
It's about building that system, a kind of machine that can handle uncertainty and still deliver value.
And to build that machine, you need that constant feedback, that validated learning, which, if I remember correctly, is the heart of the lean startup.
You're spot on.
Instead of relying on, gut feeling or doing months and months of market research, you're constantly going back and forth, testing those assumptions, getting that real-world feedback from actual customers.
And there's no better example of this in action than IMVU. I mean, their story is fascinating, right? They started with what seemed like a killer idea, using 3D avatars for instant messaging.
I remember when that came out.
Right. Like, who wouldn't want that? They poured everything into it. The tech was solid. The team was passionate. But when they finally launched, it just flopped.
Really?
Yeah, it was tough. They had to go back to the drawing board and figure out, okay, what went wrong?
So what happened?
Well, it turns out their initial assumptions about what users wanted, they were way off. Like, they thought people wouldn't want to switch from their existing platforms, why would I leave AOL, Instant Messenger, Yahoo Messenger for this new thing?
Yeah, makes sense.
They also figured people would mainly use it to connect with their existing friends.
Interesting.
And they were convinced that a standalone application, not integrated with anything else, wouldn't work.
Huh. So they were wrong on all those.
Completely wrong. And it almost sank them.
Wow.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
It turned out users, they were craving something different. They were actually open to trying new platforms.
Yeah.
They were more interested in making new connections, not just chatting with people they already knew. And that whole standalone app thing, it wasn't a deal breaker at all.
Wow. So IMVU is like a testament to this whole validated learning thing.
Oh, 100%. It's about getting out of your own head, getting out of the building, really, and testing those hypotheses against actual customer behavior. Not just what you think they want, but what they actually do. It really makes you think differently about failure,
Yeah.
It's not this big, scary thing to avoid. It's more like, part of the journey.
Yeah, you have to be willing to embrace it, learn from it.
And IMVU, they're a perfect example of that. They took those initial missteps, those wrong assumptions, and turned them into, like, stepping
They
stones.
didn't give up. They adjusted.
Exactly. They didn't just tweak things here and there. They did a complete 180, what Ries calls pivoting.
Oh, right.
They went from this tiny add-on to a full-blown standalone platform. I remember reading that and thinking, man, that takes guts.
It does, but it also takes a process. They weren't just randomly changing things.
Right. They were methodical about it.
Remember those small experiments Riss talks about? They use those masterfully.
Like changing a few words on their website, right? From avatar chat to 3D instant messaging.
Yeah.
Seemed like a small tweak, but
Huge difference, right?
huge. It completely changed how customers responded.
It's incredible what those subtle changes can reveal. Like what resonates with people, what doesn't. It shows you how important it is to test even those assumptions you think are a given.
They even tried having, like, customer service reps act as guides for new users.
Oh, interesting.
Their thinking was it would increase engagement, but
Didn't pan out.
totally flopped.
Right.
Which just goes to show not every experiment is going to be a home run.
But that's okay. Even those failures, those experiments that don't work out, they give you valuable information. You're still learning.
You're refining your understanding of what people actually want.
And for IMVU, they realized it was about creating this space,
Yeah.
a safe, fun space for people to connect with new people, which those 3D avatars, they were perfect for that.
It's like they stumbled on a hidden gem while digging for gold.
And speaking of uncovering gems, Ries talks about this thing called the minimum viable product, the MVP.
Ah, yes.
And it's about getting your idea out there quickly to test those assumptions. Like, you don't need to build the entire Death Star right away.
The MVP, it's all about maximizing what you learn with the least amount of effort. You're trying to validate those riskiest assumptions right off the bat.
It's like Groupon, right?
Oh, yeah, great example.
Yeah.
They started with this simple WordPress blog offering pizza deals.
Nothing fancy.
Nope. Not glamorous, but it got the job done. And Ries talks about different types of MVPs, too, like Zappos, the online shoe retailer.
Right.
They started as a concierge MVP, personally fulfilling those early orders to see if there was even a market for what they were selling.
And then you have Aardvark. They were a question and answer platform.
Okay.
And they used Wizard of Oz MVP. Basically, behind the scenes, they had actual humans answering those questions.
So it seemed like they had this super advanced AI, but
It was all smoke and mirrors, but it worked. It let them test their core value proposition.
it's brilliant. Validate the idea without getting bogged down in all the technical stuff right away.
The key is that openness to feedback. Be ready to pivot, make those changes, even if they're big.
So we've talked about building, testing, but how do you actually measure your progress with all this? Ries talks about this thing called innovation accounting, which, I'll be honest, sounded a little intimidating at first.
I can see that.
Like, are we talking spreadsheets and algorithms here? But then he breaks it down. And it's not as scary as it sounds. He uses the example of Grocket, the test prep company.
Right.
They were all about those vanity metrics at first.
Like total number of users, how many questions were answered.
Yeah, all that stuff that looks good on paper.
But it doesn't tell the whole story.
Exactly. And they fell into this trap calls lazy registration, letting users access the platform without creating an account.
Which seems counterintuitive, right?
Totally. But it meant they couldn't really track what users were doing, how engaged they were, if they were actually learning.
So their numbers looked good, but
But they weren't moving the needle. They weren't actually growing in a meaningful way.
it's about focusing on the metrics that matter. The ones that show you how customers are actually behaving if you're finding that product market fit.
And Grocket, to their credit, they figured that out. They shifted their focus to metrics that actually showed whether students were learning, improving their scores.
It's not just about gathering data. It's about gathering the right data, the kind that helps you make those informed decisions to iterate effectively.
Exactly. And one of the tools Res highlights is split testing. A/B testing, have you heard of that?
Oh, yeah. It's where you create two versions of something.
Right.
A product, a feature, even just a headline, and you test them head to head. See which one performs better.
Didn't Ries talk about how Vertizen, that civic engagement platform, used split testing to figure out their business model?
Oh, yeah, they're a great example.
It was really impressive, actually.
They tested everything, headlines, calls to action, even whole features.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, by A/B testing those variations, they figured out what resonated with their audience.
And they iterated quickly, like really
It's
fast.
like fine-tuning an instrument. You're making these tiny adjustments until you get it just right.
Perfect analogy. And for Votizen, that meant focusing on connecting activists with verified voters, which became their niche.
And it worked.
Their story, it just drives home that innovation accounting, it's not about crunching numbers for the sake of it.
Right.
It's about using data to steer the ship, to guide your startup towards a sustainable model, one that's validated by what customers are actually doing, not just what you think they're doing. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
What happens once you have that traction? How do you hold on to that startup agility as you grow? Because things change. It's like you've climbed Mount Everest, you're at the top, celebrating, but then you look up and realize, wait, there's a whole mountain range behind this one.
And you got to climb those too, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing about building a company. It's not just about finding that initial fit. It's about knowing how to adapt as you grow, as the market changes.
And how do you hold on to that startup mentality, that agility when things are, hopefully going well?
Ries talks about this balance, right? Between fine-tuning what's already working, what he calls tuning the engine, but then also making space for those bigger, riskier bets, those disruptive innovations. That could be the next big thing.
It's like you're trying to keep the car running smoothly while you're also like tinkering under the hood.
Exactly. And to navigate all that, he talks about this technique called the 5 whys. You heard of that one?
Yeah, it rings a bell.
It's about getting to the root cause of a problem, not just addressing the symptoms.
Like when you were a kid and you'd keep asking why, until your parents were about to lose it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this time, it's in a productive way. It's about asking why 5 times or however many times it takes to really understand what's going on.
So you're not just slapping a Band-Aid on something, you're actually fixing it for good.
Right. And Ries gives that example of the server outage at IMVU. Instead of just rebooting and hoping for the best, they used the 5 whys to figure out it was because new engineers weren't being trained properly. So they addressed that, and it prevented the same problem from happening again.
Smart. And it's not just about fixing things that are broken, it's about this mindset, this culture of continuous improvement.
Absolutely. And Ries talks about how even those big established companies, they can embrace this. He uses the example of Intuit, the financial software company.
Oh, yeah, they're huge.
And they completely changed how they develop software. They used to have these massive releases like every 18 months.
Big, long development cycles.
Yeah, but by embracing the lean startup principles, they were able to ship updates multiple times a day.
Wow, talk about agility.
It just shows you it doesn't matter how big or small you are. It's about that willingness to experiment, to iterate, to keep getting better.
So as our listeners are going through these notes, these key takeaways, what would you say is the most important thing for them to remember?
I think what's really powerful about the lean startup is that it's not just for tech companies or startups in Silicon Valley.
Right.
It's for anyone, anywhere, who's trying to navigate a changing world, whether you're launching a new product, starting a side hustle, or even just trying to make a change in your personal life.
It's about having that experimental mindset.
Exactly. It's about testing those assumptions, being willing to adapt, and remembering that failure, it's not the opposite of success. It's part of the journey.
Love that. So any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up this deep dive?
Just this. What's that one thing, that one seemingly crazy idea you've been sitting on? What if you knew you could test it out quickly, learn from it, and adapt, even if it didn't go exactly as planned? What would you try?
What would you be willing to build if you truly embraced the lean startup philosophy, not just as a set of tools, but as a way of thinking, a way of approaching the world with that curiosity and that drive to create something new? It's pretty inspiring when you think about it like that.
It is.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive.